Welcome to 3F, Faith, Family, and Freedom. Another episode with myself, Bobby Allison.
Hey guys, I'm Mateo.
I'm the psychologist, and he's the theologian. We're coming to you with a few topics today. We're going to get into the vaccine a little bit, get into some stuff on the Trump ban from Facebook, perhaps even Don Lemon's feud with Rick Santorum if we have some time, and maybe a few faith-driven topics a little later on in the podcast.
3F is a psychologist and theologian providing a much-needed commentary on the three most essential elements of life: faith, family, and freedom.
We actually had to postpone the episode yesterday, a regularly scheduled get-together that we have for these, so that Mateo could get over the COVID, breakthrough symptoms. What do they call that?
Yeah, it's like, the Moderna vaccine, you're not actually being injected with a small amount of the COVID virus. So you're not getting the COVID as part of that vaccine, but it does cause your body to respond and build antibodies that's supposed to then help you to be more resistant to it, as I understand it. But I had heard that the second vaccine, that the symptoms are usually worse than the first with Moderna. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law had pretty strong reactions to it, and my wife knew some other people who had. So I was mentally prepared that I might, but Friday I was feeling pretty good. We spoke, and then I was like, "Hey, I think I got through this thing. No reaction." Went to bed, woke up middle of the night. Actually, that would have been Thursday, but woke up in the middle of the night, freezing cold, headache, not feeling well. And just felt terrible.
That's not normal for you.
Not normal. Yeah, it's I've been through menopause already, and this was totally different. And no, I actually have not been through menopause yet, but no, it was. Yeah, I definitely felt pretty poorly. Enough that as much as I wanted to get in here and film, it was not going to happen yesterday.
So how did you choose between the different vaccines? I know your wife got the Pfizer.
That's right, and my parents
and your parents. So how did you choose between we have the Johnson & Johnson, which is a single injection. We have the Pfizer, the AstraZeneca, and the Moderna, which are all 2 rounds. So how did you choose, or was it just the availability?
Well, I can say that my wife and her parents did not have reactions as much to the Pfizer like I did and some other family members did to the Moderna. They had some soreness at the site of the injection, but for them it wasn't too bad. But what we all did, my parents' wife and I, we went to, I guess it was a government site online where you register to get in line for the vaccine. And it was sort of just happenstance that they got called up and scheduled at a facility that was doing Pfizer, and mine was at a Moderna facility. What I can say is I think I would have been hesitant. I don't know if I would have gone through with the Johnson & Johnson just because they've had some speed bumps. Have you heard about this with the blood clotting and things like that?
Right.
And so that I don't know that I would have gone through with that, but I was comfortable with either Moderna or Pfizer, whichever I had gotten called for.
I just assume our overlord Fauci sits in a room with all the various blood types and genetic profiles of applicants and says, "Oh, this one will be good for Moderna."
And if he says it, then I'm on board.
Scary stuff. Yeah. But yeah, glad you're feeling better.
Oh, thank you.
That's hey, you're safe. You can unmask. At least we hope that'll be the case. But depending on the authoritarian tendencies of our current administration, it seems like even with the vaccine, even if you've had the virus, even with the vaccine, we still can't unmask. We still can't totally open up. So, but I appreciate your courage and getting this. I'm a little bit more hesitant. I've had the virus, so I've heard that maybe I need to wait a little bit until my antibodies expire to get the vaccine. I'm sort of open to it, but I'm a little hesitant. But I appreciate your courage in doing it. So thanks for being my personal guinea pig.
You're welcome. And it's interesting you say that, because we knew that you had the virus, and we've known other people that had it and got through it. And, and we've known a fair number of people that have gotten through it. And when you hear enough of that, I think it's really easy, if you haven't been touched by death through this virus, to really just lean towards, this is no different than a flu or something else. So let's just, take our chances. And I get that. But we also, my aunt almost lost her uncle in Brazil. He was in ICU for an extended period. And it's really, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a miracle of God that he is with us. We were not sure he was going to survive. And then I have an old friend who I grew up with, in our hometown here, whose father passed away from it, who is, a relatively healthy man as far as I know. And I think for people that have actually touched the lethal side of it, or have lost someone from it, it takes on a different feeling than those who just know of the cases where you've just gotten through it and it was a little healthy. And I think it gives us different views of what this virus is and how we should respond to it, just based on who and what their experience have been with it.
It's interesting that there's so many different varieties of vaccines, so much different mixed messaging that surrounds the idea of vaccinations and a return to normalcy. I can't imagine a more dysfunctional rollout of all of this. We're pretty vaccine oriented society. We vaccinate our kids. I mean, there's a small faction of people in this country that are anti-vaxxers. You hear about all the time, where they're kind of mindful of not vaccinating their kids for fear of contracting some sort of an ailment, such as the scare of autism linked to various vaccines. So, but for the most part, we're a pretty vaccine friendly country, and so it's kind of strange how we rolled this out to be so complicated, so political. I think that's the key. And we talked about spiritual warfare last episode, and how the enemy complicates everything that we try to do, good or bad, or for the sake of good in this country, or for in our lives personally. And I think maybe there's a bit of that spiritual warfare embedded in our approach to this vaccine, since it's been politicized from day one. Masks have been politicized. So I just hope that, now that we're starting to get this thing going and people are developing immunity, herd immunity, perhaps that used to be a bad word. Now it's starting to creep back into the vernacular. So I just hope that we're kind of reaching a point where we can start to normalize again.
Yeah. And I think that's something interesting you hit on. And that's something I've thought about is, there is that sentiment out there of anti-vaccine and the concern of government overreach or something being mandatory. And I'm sensitive to that concern, especially in a world where we see more and more government overreach. But I've also thought about, like you mentioned, that there are vaccines that I was required to take as a child before entering school, and that my son was. So maybe it's the newness of this and how quick it's come about that there can be a little more concern. But it's interesting if we're going to take a hard stance that this absolutely shouldn't be mandated. I think we need to know why we are, if we're not going to walk away from all the vaccines that our children are required to take anyway for school now. Is the difference just the novelty of it, the newness of it? Do you think that's why this one's so political and we're not fighting every day over the vaccines our kids have to take to go into elementary school?
I would imagine. I think the newness of it, the fact that it was, we're still dealing with the pandemic, for goodness sake. I mean, vaccines were typically created years, sometimes even decades after the ailments in which they were created for sprung into existence, for instance, right? So, like rubella, measles, we fought these things for centuries before all of a sudden we have these vaccines, and now we have COVID-2, this coronavirus that pops up out of Eastern China all of a sudden, and immediately politicized, immediately complicated, immediately covered up by various nations, various governments. And now we have this quickly made vaccine. So I think just the synthesis of the whole thing is so much different. So I think I think that kind of justifies a certain sense of apprehension, for instance. But at the same time, I think the technology is fairly safe. It's just I think we need to circle the wagon, so to speak, and start to think in terms of will this normal. That's why it's so frustrating to see, for instance, our president duly vaccinated, or vaccinated twice with whatever vaccine he took, and still masking, making excuses for it. It's a symbolism thing. That just complicates the whole picture. I mean, if you see the leader of this country, the leader of the free world, still masking after vaccination, I mean, that kind of gives you some doubt, right? So I think that we need to circle the wagons, do a better job, and reach normalization.
And I felt that was one of the silliest moments of the joint address to Congress that he made. Is there was a point that he leaned into the microphone and emphatically whispered 3 times, "Get vaccinated, get vaccinated, get vaccinated." And here they've got everybody spread out in the building. They're all wearing masks and they've all been vaccinated. Well, if you're trying to urge the people of the country to get vaccinated, I feel like you should show that your life will be different once you're vaccinated. You can take the mask off. You don't have to live in fear. And I do get that you can still transmit the disease or the virus even if you've been vaccinated, and there's a protection in that. So I'm not saying that I'm against wearing a mask if you're going to be around elderly people, or that I'm not suggesting you just drop common courtesies. But if you've got to think about your messaging and your image, and if you're trying to show that people should get vaccinated, it's a good thing.
Yeah. Don't
wear your mask when you're walking alone as the president down the sidewalk.
Right.
Like there's nothing better.
It's like the guy who invented the parachute, for instance, right? Once you invent it, you kind of have to make sure it works, right? So you're not going to, if you're trying to get this thing out in the market, exactly. you're not going to sit there and try to safetify the invention that you created. So I mean, if we're gonna normalize this society, I mean, we want to use it. We want to test it. We want to show confidence in it. So
exactly. I was driving somewhere the other day and kids were congregating at their bus stops, and I saw 2 young kids standing out waiting for the bus. They weren't near each other. They were probably 20 feet apart, each on their phones or something, and they're each just standing outside with a mask on. And I was just thinking, man, that's kind of sad. Maybe if they're required to put it on when they get on the bus, I get it. But like they're already masked up, just standing alone outside waiting for the bus. And I'm not an anti-masker. You probably know I'm pretty quick to put mine on in different scenarios, but there's still a point that I think, oh man, this is getting a little sad. We need to think about what we're doing.
I'm an anti-masker.
Are you a pretty vehement anti-masker?
I get a lot of kicks out of making people in stores force me to wear a mask. I carry one with me at all times. I'm not a total anarchist, but I wait for someone to ask me to mask up. I'll still give them a little bit of trash talk, but then I'll put the thing on.
Now, is that the point when you come up behind their back shoulder and get your mouth right next to their cheek and say, like, where are the light bulbs? And breathe heavily onto their cheek for them to ask you to put the mask on?
A few well-placed sneezes. No, but what else can we do to our kids? I mean, so masks, they're not effective. I mean, let's face it. They're meant for they're surgical. They're meant to not spread germs in an operatory setting that's supposed to be sterile, right? They're not meant to be worn all day, multiple times, touching your face. If you go into a surgical, an OR, for instance, observation room at the hospital during a surgery, You have to scrub up. You don't touch your mask ever. You don't even touch. You don't even contaminate your hands once you scrub up. Usually your mask is put on for you by some, or you have it on before, but you're not messing with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not using these masks the way they're supposed to be used. They don't even prevent they prevent direct droplets, but they don't prevent droplets around you. They don't prevent the inhalation of the air around you. And this virus is airborne. So it's not effective from day one. And then on top of that, kids almost show immunity to this thing. You know, they don't spread it as easily and quickly as adults do. They don't get it. And if they get it, they don't have the symptoms that adults acquire. So what are we doing to our kids? So not only have we've perpetrated this long-term shutdown, forced isolation of our children. On top of that, making them wear masks, deterring them from showing their faces, freely experiencing the world, creating all these rules that are not really scientifically based. And then when we do send them back to school, they have to mask up. They have to wear these things that they're breathing. For goodness sake, school athletes are asked to compete with masks in some states.
Are they? Wow.
So, I mean, there's that video of the girl that passed out at her track meet. I mean, I think she won the race, but I think she passed out at the finish line. So, yeah, I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing? I mean, it just goes to the whole rollout of this whole thing. It's just so, I think government, that's the source of all this dysfunction. It's government. You never want government running a operation that you need to be efficient.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
And I know there's been an organization in our county, as I'm sure you know as well, CCDF is moving now to work to have it lifted to where children don't have to wear masks in schools here in our county. And I definitely think I support that, especially now that teachers can get vaccinated. I never would have been concerned for the kids since very few kids actually get this. But in the early days of the virus, I might have felt, well, for the sake of the teachers who are willing to come, we should do masks. But now that teachers have the ability to get vaccinated, I think I would agree that our kids should not have to wear masks in schools all day long, or make it optional. Obviously, if the child wants to, more power to them, let them wear it, but at least have it be optional.
Yeah.
Since teachers can be vaccinated.
Yeah, that's CCDFUSA.com, and it's County Citizens Defending Freedom. It's a local organization, Christian in their founding, of all denominations, all faiths. It's meant to be a center for moralistic thinking in the county. And so what they've tried to do is approach the school board and lobby for not masking. They call it face freedom, I think it is.
Is that it? I couldn't remember.
It's pretty cool. Face freedom. We need face freedom in this country. So yeah, it's CCDFUSA.com. So let's get to our first topic.
Let's do it.
The Facebook ban on former President Donald Trump.
Yeah, lifetime ban now, right?
I think they've reserved the right to rethink this in 6 months. I think.
How gracious.
So essentially, Facebook created a board, a separate board of supposedly independent personnel, thinkers that
experts, no doubt,
certainly experts that were to decide the fate of Facebook's of those that broke the rules for Facebook.
Okay.
So somehow Trump must have broken the rules more drastically than everybody else that always breaks the rules on Facebook with inciting violence. Hey, meet here for the next BLM rally. We'll bash up some targets and celebrate George Floyd through the disintegration of the next dollar store. So essentially they decided to keep the ban going, but look at it again in 6 months and reserve the right to ban him permanently.
Okay, so at this one, they've kicked the ball. They've reinstated it, but they've kicked the can Another
Correct.
6 months.
Yeah, 6 months, I believe.
Now, has he been given parameters of what he can or cannot do within these 6 months to make that change? Or do this panel of experts or jurors of his peers, whatever it is, have 6 months to continue to pray, fast, and beseech the Lord on what they do at the end of this 6 months?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's purely top down. I don't think there's any type of wiggle room for Trump at all. I think they've decided for him that he's gone. This is why he's launched his own platform. I think this weekend it dropped where he's going to have a platform of his own, similar perhaps to Twitter, where he can share his daily messages, share his updates, what's going on with his ideas for 2024, et cetera. But essentially the problem with this is Facebook has become the public square, whether we like it or not. It's a private company, sure, and private companies, according to our capitalistic conservative culture, can essentially do what they want to do as long as it's within the framework of the law and the Constitution, or not even Constitution, framework of the law specifically. But essentially, Facebook, with the popularity that it's become, is our public square, correct?
Yeah, like our virtual marketplace or public square. Yeah, I would agree with
Right.
you.
And if you can ban the once leader of the free world, duly elected for 4 years, and by all accounts, did not destroy the world. If you could ban that person, then essentially you have an autocracy or a what do they call it? Oligarchy, correct? I mean, so in other words, Mark Zuckerberg is the equivalent of, say, of Vladimir Putin in America now.
In the country of Facebook,
If
the virtual country of Facebook, he is the Putin.
Well, it's a syllogism, right? I mean, if Facebook is the public square, then Mark Zuckerberg controls the public square. So it's kind of an oligarchy similar to what they have in Russia. I mean, if you ask me, syllogistically. I mean, but I think, obviously, we have elected leaders, we have elected local officials, county officials, federal officials that can essentially probably write Mark Zuckerberg out, antitrust type litigation and get him out of here. But for all intents and purposes, currently, he decides who speaks.
And is this ban supposedly due to the tenuous connection between Trump's comments and the Capitol riot, or is there something else? Is it all that, and that they're trying to directly connect him to that, or is there more to it? I
think that was what they used as the catalyst, or as the straw that broke the camel's back. Essentially, I think the ban even occurred on the 6th, if I'm not correct, or around that, very, very tightly around that window. They're essentially trying to connect Trump's speech that day and utterances on Facebook as an incitement to violence, and therefore, what do they call it? Insurrection, or I think that's the word they used, insurrection, or attempted coup of the newly elected government or Biden administration. So yeah, they're essentially saying that he went further than anyone else in inciting violence, even though you had Maxine Waters out there saying you need to get up in the face of politicians at the gasoline station and all that stuff, and other people like for goodness sake, like Louis Farrakhan, who actually tells people to go and commit violence on a periodic basis, depending on what race you are, or if you're of Jewish descent, et cetera. So apparently Trump went further than all of these people ever did.
Yeah, and even that it's a tenuous connection at best, if there's a connection at all. Personally, I don't believe there's a connection between Trump's speech and that. But where it leaves me, when I heard that they had banned Trump for life, as I understood it, or even the first time around when they were thinking about it, and I personally canceled my Twitter account when Twitter banned Trump. I had it for many, many years, but for me, that was easier to just cancel and walk away from, just to try to, I just didn't want to support a social media organization that was going to ban entirely a president that I thought was one of, if not the best presidents of all time. So I walked away from Twitter. Facebook is a little harder for me to walk away from. I'll be honest. A big part of it is all the pictures I've got on there from years past. It's like my photo albums. It'd be akin to just burning old photo albums.
That's how they get you.
It's how they've got me. It is. But I find myself going back and forth between, okay, part of me says, if I absolutely don't agree with them banning Trump, so I want to walk away from it. And if every Christian and conservative, or at least those who support Trump and are conservative, walked away, would they feel it? I don't know. But then another part of me says, but that is the public square you speak of. And if, as long as we can still be there to witness, to evangelize, to spread the gospel, to spread conservative values, are we making a mistake to basically abandon it and just leave it to the cuckoos altogether? And I go back and forth. Do you have an opinion on that, or what do you think is the way to approach this?
I do. I think, and I'm one that I got rid of Twitter and Facebook.
You did walk away from both.
I do. And I kind of, and after I did that before we started this podcast. So for purposes of just advertisement and, those types of purposes, I kind of wish I would have kept it just so that we could put this out and get some more, favor for the podcast early on. But I mean, I'm just going to let God do that for us, or let your Facebook do the talking. But
God or my Facebook,
right?
Whoever can do that better. So.
Yes, it'll be close, I'm sure.
Lord help us.
Facetiously, but I do. I think, and we could look to the Bible for as we should for any question we have in life. You look to the Bible. I mean, a guy. I mean, they had a word to get out. The apostles, Jesus had a word to get out. He wanted to invite people to believe in him and bring glory to the kingdom, like we all try to do as Christians. So he had a word to get out. And I think the best example in the Bible of somebody who really knew how to reach people was Paul, the apostle Paul. He had I think it's in the book of Acts where he discusses bringing the message to people in the way that they read or consume media. Correct. I mean, I think that's the gist of what he's trying to say. If you want to try to be, you don't want to try to manipulate people necessarily, but you want to be a chameleon in the way that you approach various groups of people. For instance, if he's trying to witness to a group of Jews, he's going to go into that community. He's going to observe the law, and then he's going to talk about Christ. But he's not going to go in there and be a complete rebel all the time. I mean, what he's talking about is rebellious, but he's going to try and fit in. He's going to try to go in and get the favor of the people, or get them to at least accept that he's one of them, or was once one of them, and then talk about what he needs to talk about, which is Christ. So I think in this case, I mean, as Christians, as or even if you're not Christian, you're just conservative, you want to try to spread those values. You kind of have to. You might want to consider staying on Facebook. You might want to consider staying on Twitter so that you can become more of an influencer with those ideas. I think if you I think you're well within your rights, and I think it's justifiable to leave and to go a different way, perhaps Parler or Ramble, other platforms where you could be just as much of an influencer. But if you want to reach those people who may be stuck in their own echo chambers, I think you might need Facebook and Twitter. I mean,
you make a good point. I think what you might be alluding to, along with just what Paul models in his life, like you mentioned, is he said, "I have become all things to all people, that some might be saved." And then in his actions, like you said, he shows that. And so I think that's a valid point. I still find myself thinking a little bit, though, is that, especially if we're looking at it through the lens of Paul, is it just for those evangelists and proselytizers who have been called specifically to go into that realm and marketplace to evangelize, but the rest of us should make our stance and get away? Or should we all be there to try to keep the numbers there? I 100% agree with you that we need those individuals like a Paul to go into that place and evangelize, but should we all be there, or should we just make sure our influencers get there?
That's a very good point. We don't necessarily immerse ourselves in the mission fields, for instance, right? We send missionaries out to proselytize, to spread the word. I guess probably to save or to keep safe those more vulnerable among us, like our kids, our elderly, those that might be a little bit more susceptible or vulnerable in a chaotic situation or in a dangerous situation. In the public square, I mean, for a virtual public square, I mean, I guess you could make the argument there's less of a danger, but things can get pretty vitriolic on those sites. I mean, if you're on Twitter and you post anything that, we were talking about this before the podcast. I mean, we've both been in situations where we posted things and then lost friends or discussed things. I mean, I've explored various opinions with even longtime friends and even patients of mine that have been surprised or upset with things that I've said, which is definitely a problem. I think it's a departure from a very professional conversation that we should all continue to have around all topics. I mean, we shouldn't be so closed off that we can't talk about politics, talk about faith, talk about different things in our lives that are pertinent and meaningful without resorting to violence or or bad arguments. But we both experienced that. So, so that makes a lot of sense, having the ability to separate yourself and having a mission field dynamic. In which case, maybe we can create some Christian platforms, which I would imagine exist, but I don't know of any off the top of my head. Perhaps maybe down the road, 3F can become such a platform, God willing, but we could have a Christian platform of that nature, for instance. I mean, we know there's certain conservative platforms, Parler's more conservative, Ramble is, more conservative, Gab is more conservative, or Christian mindset. I think the CEO of Gab is a Christian. But that's a good point with the mission mindset.
And I'm not necessarily endorsing that that's what we should do. This is something I'm still fleshing out and figuring out on my own, because it's new to me. So I don't know if
this is all new.
But I see it from both sides still, and I'm trying to figure out the best move and where it lands. And I don't have the answers.
This is the cutting edge. I think that the problem that leftists don't understand is that they're eventually going to have to confront themselves. That's why I kind of want to, this is something I've been kind of toiling with in my head, having like what I call the Robespierre of the week.
And explain to me what that
well, let me kind of lay it out. So essentially, like, leftists are essentially canceling people. They're censoring speech. They're censoring opinions that differ from their own. And this is a slippery slope, and it always has been in our history. When you cancel speech, when you suppress or censor speech, it's the breeding grounds for authoritarianism, totalitarianism. Correct?
Absolutely.
So and you go back to the French Revolution. One of the main proponents of the guillotine was Robespierre. He was the one he was the guy for the equivalent of the left at that time, who was leading the powers that be to the guillotine, such that they could be canceled or killed,
literally canceled,
literally
off with their head,
off with their head, So once all those guys were gone, once all those big guys were gone, the crowd turned on him, and he was one of the first of the equivalent leftist establishment of that day that was executed by the mob. So essentially, when you're creating a slippery slope with this stuff, it doesn't end well. And I think a lot of young people don't understand that we're dealing with a lot of. There's nothing new under the sun. Human nature is what it is, and so when we go down this road historically, it doesn't end well. So I've thought about perhaps having a Robespierre of the week. I thought, well, last week when what's his name for Fox News Sundays, Chris Wallace, when he was so super optimistic about Joe Biden's address to the State of the Union speech, he was like, "Oh, this is the best speech I ever heard." I just thought Robespierre of the week. So I thought about having his picture behind us, Robespierre of the week, but that'll come maybe in due time.
People so quick to want to cancel or take someone to the virtual guillotine, as you say. What's our plan if we are banned from this platform or that platform? Right. It's something, and it's a shame we've even had to think about that, to just simply be practicing our First Amendment right in the virtual public square. Right. Yeah, there's something very wrong with that.
Oh, totally.
Scenario. And
I can see him. It's gonna happen. I think history repeats itself quite often. I think it's like I said, there's nothing new under the sun. You're guaranteed persecution as a Christian. It's gonna happen. So we just have to be ready. We have to be able to diversify, figure out different ways we can keep ourselves relevant.
And Jesus said, Jesus told the disciples in a last gathering with them that no servant is greater than their master, and that they have hated me, so don't be surprised when the world hates you. I don't necessarily have that word for word, but that's pretty close to what he said, translated into English, and the gist of it. So, and as things get more divided, when people begin to hate you, clearly, obviously, when it happens on a Christian level and due to your religion and Christianity, it's exactly that. They hated Jesus, they're going to hate you. But so much of this stuff, like we've talked about before on this podcast, has a spiritual component behind it. Even if it seems like politics, it's that spiritual warfare that, the spiritual element is entering into politics because it's dividing on spiritual lines. Where, as a country, we're no longer all on a pretty good spiritual footing, going towards the same thing. And some people are a little bit on this side of how to achieve that, and some are on that side, but we're all on a similar spiritual footing moving forward. That hasn't happened. A large chunk of this nation has just dropped morality, dropped God, and they've completely gone another direction, to where now, even if it's being called politics, it's very much spiritual, because a huge element of politics is actively fighting against the things of God and the kingdom, even if they don't call it that. So when you're hated over your politics, whether you realize it or not, a lot of times in today's world, you're actually being hated over certain religious stances. Many of you have those stances because you're religious. Some of you are simply conservative and don't even call yourself religious, but by default, you're on the side of the kingdom of God. And I'm not speaking political parties here, although I could come close to doing that. But right now I'm just talking morality and right and left of things. I'll just leave it at that. But when you're being hated, it's because the enemy, he's gaining ground on one side of politics, and he's gaining more and more ground. And it doesn't mean that everyone on that side is evil. That's not what it means at all. Many of them are being abandoned by their own party, but they just don't know what to do, because for so long they said, I'm not of that other party, I don't like it. But as the enemy gains more ground and more people are more open to the enemy's influence because they're not living by the book, when you are hated and when you receive vitriol and hatred for your political views, it goes along with that. No servant is greater than their master, and they've hated me, so they'll hate you. You're standing up for the kingdom either consciously or subconsciously, and all the forces of hell are aligned against you as a result of it. So be glad when you're persecuted for that. And it's not easy, but it means you're doing something right.
Amen. So what's Don Lemon's motive in saying something that to a lot of people sounds obviously dumb? It's like you don't really read history. You don't understand how this country was founded if you're going to say that he should apologize for saying it's European in nature. So what we're dealing with here is critical theory. He even said it afterwards. He said Native American lives matter. So by not crediting Native Americans for the founding of this country, we're somehow negating their existence or negating their suffering that happened subsequent to the founding. I would agree with anybody that would say that we mistreated natives here. We took land when we should have worked with them or tried to. The Trail of Tears was a culmination of just horrific treatment of these people. And, empires, colonies, the processes of the past often perpetrated these things on more primitive cultures when we came across them. The conquistadors with Central America, horrific atrocities. But, the end result is what we see now. Our culture. So there's good and bad that goes into everything. So should we have, but essentially what Don Lemon is trying to do or Don Lemon, I'm sure how you pronounce his name, is trying to do is undercut the founding of this country. It's critical theory. So in a very clumsy way, he's perpetrating what we were talking about before, the Facebook, all this undercurrent of cancel, undercurrent of focus on social justice. It's real scary.
Yeah. And it does not have to be a dichotomy to be a patriot and to love America does not mean you're a racist that hates Native Americans. History played out the way that it did, and we are where we are today. But Don Lemon is feeding into or perpetuating this divisive idea and mindset that to even be proud of America makes you a racist against everyone, including Native Americans. And if he's going to say Native American lives matter, it's trying to appropriate righteousness in the same way that BLM is trying to appropriate righteousness, and to say that, yes, Native American lives matter, just like Black lives matter. But if you're going to start, and I know Don Lemon wasn't doing this, but if you're going to start an organization, Native American Lives Matter, that's against America today because of what has happened in history, I'm not going to support your organization, even though I do believe Native American lives matter, because it's just twisting history, and it's nihilistic, because the entire history of the world is one of conquest and competing civilizations. And if you're going to cancel America, you pretty much have to cancel every single country, because at some time it was founded on conquest, except for those rare groups that are still left in Papua New Guinea and the rainforest and other places. And if you want to be so woke, go join one of those groups, because that's the only place you're going to find that has an imposed civilization on another. I mean,
what culture? I mean, you can't really. I would press Don Lemon to come up with any type of mainstream or known culture that was created absent conflict.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, let's go back to Africa, and there have been conquests between tribes in Africa. So do we Do we pilfer through African history, find out which African people were aggressors over the other, and cancel as many of the portions of Africa as we can, who spread through their conquest and civilization? It's a sad part of human nature, but it's part of human nature.
Right. So, and it's such a revisionist history approach. I mean, even native tribes here in North America routinely took each other over, took land back, increased their territories, experienced the reduction of their territories through conflict. Even where we sit now with the Seminoles and various conflicts that probably happened back in those days. I mean, there's not a spot in this country that wasn't contested even in those days. Perhaps, there's certainly nuance to what happened, but I mean, there's nothing happens absent conflict in human nature. I mean, conflict is necessary and inevitable from a psychological perspective. I mean, you can't have a relationship with another human being without sometimes having conflict, whether it be, verbal, emotional, outright physical. It happens all the time. It's inevitable and necessary. Conflict is necessary. I always tell couples, if you're not fighting, you're not seeking change or seeking any type of progress in your relationship. And fighting happens in various ways. It can be just deciding who washes the dishes. Typically that's going to be that could be a fight sometimes. Like, I wash the dishes all the time. You never wash the dishes. It's like,
is that you or your wife?
That's me.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, I wash the dishes now. My wife does the laundry.
Okay.
It's we've settled on that through conflict,
Okay.
severe conflict,
Physical conflict.
Yes. She's tough. She's a tough woman. But essentially, it's revisionist history, and we see this with the cancel culture. We see this with woke social justice. Essentially, it's critical theory. It's back to that critical theory aspect. We're looking at the 1619 Project recently, which is centered along Black Lives Matter, for instance, right? So it's not just in a static situation. Yeah, that makes sense. Black lives do matter. But as an organization, as a movement, it's subversive because it requires us to rewrite the history of this country. Case in point, Hannah Jones' 1619 Project, which some schools are in liberal territories are replacing the curriculum. Some conservatives have come out with the 1776 Project, which is a rebuttal to the 1619. So essentially, with what Don Lemon's trying to say here is that with Native Lives Matter, they essentially founded this country. They essentially are responsible for our culture and not Europeans, which on its face is not valid. It's not true, but but Don Lemon virtue signals it, makes himself the ambassador to the woke, and we have to, as conservatives, as Christians, we have to say, no, it's wrong.
It's not a false statement to say that Native Americans were here first. That's why we call them Native Americans.
Yes.
That's an absolutely true statement. It's a false statement to say that Native Americans founded America as we know it today. No, that was done by European settlers. If you take that out, this would still just be a landmass of cultural warfare between competing tribes. There would be no CNN. There would be no Don Lemon. White settlers wouldn't come over. They wouldn't have brought their slaves. There would be no black people here, no white people here, unless the conquest had happened later. But
yeah.
But it's simply not accurate to say that America as we know it was founded by Native Americans. No, they were on this landmass before we came.
Right.
Which when we look at the Bible, Abraham was called out of Ur of the Chaldeans in Babylon to the land of Canaan, which was inhabited by another group of people. But God told him that would be his land one day. The Canaanites had to be displaced. Now, Abraham's not given the land right away. God told Abraham that the fullness of the Canaanite sin had to come before he would get the land. God was giving the Canaanites more time to either repent or just, and not until they got to the fullness of their sins would they be taken off the land. Now, before that happened, God takes Abraham and the Jews and allows them to become slaves. So the people that God is going to at one time have colonize Canaan and overtake Canaan were actually given a time of slavery themselves. So God lets people fall into slavery. God lets people colonize. Why do we know which he does, when, and how? That's beyond us. And this does bring up the concept of manifest destiny, but I'm not claiming to know God. I'm not saying it was God's will for the Indians to be subdued and driven west. All I'm saying is we at least have to be open, if we look at the Bible, to say that God allows and actually involves himself sovereignly at times in groups of people coming and supplanting another group of people. And he also does it to the Jews when he allows societies to come and overtake the Jews and bring them back into slavery when they've sinned. But, we see this in the Bible as well. And that has to be addressed and brought into the conversation if we're Christians and we're not just writing off and canceling the Bible. But I guess Don Lemon might not have a problem canceling the Bible because, as I've said before, he said that Jesus himself admitted that he wasn't perfect. So I don't think Don Lemon's spending a lot of time, there. But how do we take the Abraham story if we're going to vilify America for its founding over the Native Americans? Well, then we also equally vilify the Jews taking over the land of Canaan. God doesn't do that. Jesus Christ didn't do that. He didn't vilify them for that. So we've got to decide where we stand on that.
I guess we should probably run this by Don Lemon himself. Maybe we could get an audience with him and question him about what the edicts he would like to pass. I think slavery is such a weird topic, or it's become such a strange phenomenon. All of a sudden, 200 years after its perpetration on this country, right? So, it's almost like we're led to believe America invented slavery. With the slavery of Africans that were sold to this country, to our colonies, to the some of the landowners that inhabited areas of this country during its founding, and you would people like Don Lemon, Hannah Jones would say that therefore we invented slavery. It's a very egocentric way of some of these people saying that America came up with it when it's been present in culture and society and history from the beginning, and it still exists today. So we have not gotten rid of slavery. Sexual slavery is very prevalent still in this country. We know that there's sex trafficking. There's situations that occur on a daily basis where, like that, the Texas neighborhood that had human trafficking inhabitants, and there was just in the news these last couple weeks, 90 people found in this house.
Something about that
in a Texas neighborhood. There were this group of Mexicans that were being human trafficked. That's the equivalent, I would say, of slavery today. The Uyghurs in China are being held against their will to create products for us that we use, Nikes, etc. That's slavery. North Korea, we just listened to a podcast earlier where Jordan Peterson was discussing a North Korean escapee that dealt with slavery when she was a kid. It still exists. It hasn't gone away. I mean, you would probably be led to believe by someone like Don Lemon or Hannah Jones that slavery no longer exists, but it's just not the case. So again, they're rewriting history. They're trying to overemphasize America's role in racism to an end. It's a means to an end. They're trying to destroy the founding of this country, the founding formula, because of this blemish that exists for all time. I think when you consider the Bible doesn't say whether slavery is good or bad, correct? I mean, what does the Bible have any, what does the Bible say specifically about slavery? Do you remember any scripture?
Yeah, I don't know that there's any lines in there that use the word slavery and say, thou shalt not have slaves.
Right.
It can be taken from just understanding scripture and the overarching themes of scripture that slavery is clearly a bad thing and that it's wrong. But that being said, it's nuanced as you read the Bible, because again, Abraham and Sarah had slaves. These are the patriarchs of the faith, had slaves. There were also periods, like I said, that God allowed his people to go into slavery in Egypt or to Babylon.
Exactly.
There's
the
a
Jews
time
were enslaved for for thousands of years.
Paul in the New Testament encourages a slave to return to his master. When Jesus was on earth, he reached out to the poor, the suffering, the downtrodden, but he was not an abolitionist.
Right.
He had another higher purpose than that. Now, his principles can speak against slavery, but he was not an abolitionist. His primary role was not to end slavery. That was not the reason he came to earth. He was trying to end spiritual slavery, but he upheld Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who had slaves. So it's nuanced. Just because George Washington had slaves does not mean that God was against George Washington and he was a bad person, because God is not against Abraham. Quite the contrary.
Right.
And we have to keep that in perspective. God knows that slavery takes place and exists. Surprise, God could come down and he could miraculously end slavery everywhere in the world with a snap of the fingers or less by just killing all slaveholders and freeing the slaves. But God has used slavery to his purposes in mysterious ways on both sides. And we have to be careful if we try to play God and cancel things out because of slavery, because God doesn't do that.
Right. Deuteronomy 29:29, folks. That is my favorite Bible verse, because the secret things are kept with the Lord. We have the Bible. It says a lot. We've studied it for thousands of years. We still don't know everything we need to know. We're trying our best, but I for whatever reason, I think that slavery is part of that secret things. Why is it here? Why do we still do it? Why do we continuously perpetrate something that's so vile? Owning another person. It's terrible. The fact that we perpetrated that upon Africans and other peoples in this country is definitely a severe blemish, but it happened. And out of that, we now have an extremely diverse country. We have an African American, we have a black population that is beautiful, that is productive, that adds to the culture every day, adds to the diversity every day. It makes for great communities. Just like, holistically, all sorts of stuff, and I think it's a great part of this country. I mean, you go to like some countries around this world, it's so homogenous. It's kind of crazy. You've been to Japan.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's a bunch of short, dark-haired people.
Well, they're getting taller.
Okay.
They're getting taller.
That's enough.
Because the diet has changed.
Okay.
Recently.
I'm sorry. I'm a quarter Japanese, so by nature I cannot be racist against Japanese people. But
Candace Owens can be racist against black people. So according to woke liberalism, you can be racist to Japanese even though you're Japanese, according to woke philosophy. But
True.
Anyway, sorry
guys. Sorry. I know you come to America, you see black people, you see Asian people, you see Hispanic, you see brown people, you see lily white people. It's like it's a huge country with so much diversity and so much power because of it. When you immigrate to this country, you are acculturated. Not every country can say that. I mean, I think France has this problem. You know, when people immigrate there, you got to become French. You can't retain much of your own ethnicity. Here in this country, you can retain your ethnicity. You don't even have to learn the language, for goodness sake. Have you been to Miami and tried to order a hamburger at McDonald's? You have to know Spanish almost, or at least have somebody with
Depending
you.
on the McDonald's.
Hamburguesa. You know, it's like it's a great country for those reasons. So slavery, horrible. Yes. The products of slavery, for instance, beautiful. I mean, I don't know. In the Bible, slavery, bad. The result of slavery, Israel.
And God actually used Israel's captivity in Egypt, that slavery there, to keep them pure from the gods of Egypt and Canaan, while Canaan was reaching the fullness of their sins.
Yeah.
So if the Jewish people had been in Canaan, they would have gotten all mixed in with Canaan's God and the deep sin there. If they had just assimilated into Egyptian society and hadn't been just kept together through persecution and slavery, they would have taken on Egypt's gods. Yeah. So we can see where God is using their 400 years as slaves in Egypt to keep them pure to him before going in. So that's just an example of God utilizing the negative thing of slavery for a different ends. Now, maybe one of the ends here, even though it was terrible, is some black people would not be in this country today if their forebears had not been slaves. There would have been African-American immigration to this country at some point, possibly. They might not have wanted to come because if there'd been no slavery, the early settlers might have been more racist and even discouraged black immigration, but not all black people, but some black people are here and worship God because their forebears were slaves and were introduced to Christianity as opposed to the animistic religions of Africa in America.
I mean, so of course it's God's plan. All of this, I think and so that makes Don Lemon instantly an extreme lay person. I mean, I don't know it. I don't know his heart. He may believe in Jesus, but from what I understand of him, I don't know if he's a Christian.
He has very confused ideas about Jesus. If he does,
it seems like it.
Believe, and I'm not trying to say that judgmentally, but it certainly helps your connection and relationship to Jesus when you understand the big story.
But it makes sense that he would have these conclusions, that he would come to these conclusions based on data that is obviously in front of him. So without Jesus, I can understand why he would make these mistakes, because he does not buy into God having this plan, that this is inevitable. This is prophecy. This will happen regardless of what we do. But even if you take a purely secular look at this, life is complicated. We are not simple creatures. There's cause and effect that permeates for millennia. We do things out of safety, fear, optimism, ambition that sometimes leads us astray. Sometimes leads to death, leads to murder, leads to conflict. War, all sorts of stuff that have been perpetrated from the beginning. And the cause and effect of which cannot be boiled down to simply racism, wokeism, social justice. What about this guy's suffering? It's nuanced.
It's a good point. It's an oversimplification.
Yeah.
No, that's a great point.
And what's their end game? What do they want? What does Don Lemon hope to achieve by saying Native lives matter in that situation? Of course they do. But what is he really trying to do? That's what we need to keep our eye on as a Christian culture. That this man is saying something that's anti-God, anti-Christ. He's trying to move us away from these founding teachings that in hopes of gaining power himself one day. And that's what we need to remember.
And it takes discernment sometimes to know the difference. Sometimes it's easier to tell than others, but bitterness is of the devil. Righteous indignation is of God. But if you're operating in bitterness, and if you're coming from a bitter place, that's never coming from God and the Holy Spirit. That's from
Amen.
the devil.
Amen.
Now, you can have righteous indignation, and Don Lemon might think he's exercising righteous indignation. That's why I say sometimes it takes discernment. But what these woke leftist philosophies offer you is it's a false righteousness, like the false righteousness of the Pharisees. But if you really get alone with yourself or with God and look at it, you're probably operating in bitterness. And if you hate America, that's not of God. It's not to say that America was perfect and it has its blemishes. But if you hate America, that's not of God and the Holy Spirit. That's of the enemy. I'm sorry.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. Hating America, and there is a sense of hate here, and it's projected. We talked last session or last episode about leftists that tend to project onto Christians, onto centrists, conservatives, people that don't believe everything that they believe or trust everything they trust. They tend to project onto us what they are actually doing or actually feeling. For instance, racism right now is so low in this culture, but it's practiced at a very high level by leftists. Critical theory is racism. It is defining people by their skin color, by their ethnicity rather than their character. And that's racism. So again, projection from a psychological perspective, it's classic, it's Freudian, it's it's toxic. So
yeah, I the main proponents behind this stuff at the highest levels, it's meant to be divisive and to tear us apart and destroy this country. It's not people that have a passion for minorities or people groups. It's presented that way, but the people at the top are trying to sow division and discord because it doesn't take a lot of reason and rationality to see that this is actually destroying how far we've come past racism as a country. And men and women of God have helped us take those steps on both sides of the racial divide. Whites and blacks, men and women of God have had us come so far from the days of slavery. But right now they're trying to sow a discord and take us back 200 years. And it's so disgusting that they present that as a righteous cause when it's the exact opposite.
I agree. At its base, it's nihilism. It's a scorched earth mentality. So I guess we should probably wrap it up. I think that's about as good as we'll get for that topic today. Like I said, we've got some ideas through this topic for other sessions that we can discuss. Critical theory, I think, is going to become fairly for the time that it's being practiced by the leftists in our purview or in our orbit. I think it's going to be something that keeps on needing to be addressed.
Yeah, you're going to need to know what it is to be able to either accept it or speak against it. You can't be neutral, and we'll do what we can to continue to inform you on it. You've got to know what it is. There's no other way around it today.
Yeah. We'll try to put some better definitions. We'll try to talk about it in as clear a way as we can, but we'll put some definitions up on some of the content that we post and try to better inform you guys on its origins and what the actual definitions of it are. So I wanted to mention again, County Citizens Defending Freedom. So if you get a chance to go to ccdfusa.com, we're both Polk County boys, born and raised. Mateo and I, we're multi-generation Florida families. We're Florida boys, Christians first, but Florida family men second. We love this country, but we love this state too. And County Citizens Defending Freedom is going to be a good organization to uphold the values of Christians here, people that just want to keep these values that we were raised on, that we want our kids to experience for the next 100 years. So check out ccdfusa.com. Mateo, good discussion today.
Yeah.
Any parting shots?
No, I just look forward to the next one.
Are you totally symptom free now, or were you pushing through some residual COVID chaos there?
No, I think I'm pretty good now. Thank you.
Okay. Well, go home. Let's go to church tomorrow and pick it up next week.
Sounds good. It's fun.
For exclusive content and bonus footage, please subscribe to our Patreon page at patreon.com/3F Community. That's patreon.com/3F Community. We'd love to have you join the family.